The 2018 Atlanta Press Club Loudermilk Young Debate Series. Brought to you from the studios of Georgia Public Broadcasting. The Republican race for Secretary of State.
Hello to you and welcome. I'm Sine Simpson, an evening anchor with Fox 5 Atlanta. We're excited to have you here for the Atlanta Press Club Loudermilk Young Debate Series, originating from the studios of Georgia Public Broadcasting in Atlanta. Now, this is the runoff debate among Republican candidates for Secretary of State. So let's meet the candidates. We're going to present them in alphabetical order. David Belle-Isle runs a small business as a real estate attorney and formerly practiced corporate and real estate law. And Brad Raffensperger is CEO and owner of Tendon Systems, LLC, which is a specialty contracting and engineering design firm. Let's also meet our panelists, Bradley George, a senior reporter and editor at Georgia Public Broadcasting, and Patricia Murphy, a columnist covering national politics. Glad to have everyone with us. So let's get started. For rules on today's debate, please visit the Atlanta Press Club website at atlantapressclub.org. And now to start the debate, each candidate will be asked a question by both of the panelists. And Bradley George, you're going to get the first question to David Belle-Isle.
Thanks, Sine. The new Secretary of State, one of the first things that they're going to have to do is deal with the state's voting system. Secretary of State Brian Kemp has set up a commission right now that's looking at different options. But everyone agrees that the current voting machines that the state of Georgia uses are outdated and they need to be replaced as soon as possible. If you're elected Secretary of State, how quickly will you work to replace those machines?
Well, Bradley, I think it's important that we work quickly to do that. Right now, when we vote, we have to, by faith, believe that once we cast ballot, that our vote will be recorded just the way that it was made. And so I think it's important that we have, from a functionality standpoint, a system that provides not only an electronic record, but also a paper record of each and every vote. The system I've been talking about now for 16 months would actually involve 2 electronic records and a paper record. And I think that creates better voter security and better voter confidence. In implementing that system, it's going to take working with the 159 boards of elections, and that should be the top priority of the Secretary of State in terms of making sure we have a smooth presidential election here coming up in 2020.
All right. Well, Patricia Murphy, we're going to ask you to present the next question now to Brad Raffensperger.
Mr. Raffensperger, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution has reported that you had about $130,000 of unpaid taxes. You responded in that article, "I don't owe anything." Did you ever owe anything? Is that article accurate? If you did ever owe anything, when did you repay it? And how were they unpaid in the first place?
Well, thank you for your question. When I talked to the AJC and also to WSB a week ago, I said if there's anything that I had overlooked 10 or 20 years ago, I'd be more than happy to take care of it, and we did. And that was a couple of liens in Gwinnett County for $250 and something in Muskogee County. The specific one you're referring to is Mississippi, which is not related to me. It's a different LLC that I never had any ownership in, and I don't owe anything on that. Thank you for your question.
Thank you. Well, Bradley George, it's your turn now to ask a question of Brad Raffensperger.
Mr. Raffensperger, the issues page on your website, it includes sections on some of the things that you would expect a Secretary of State to deal with if they're elected. But you also talk about the fair tax and human trafficking. And I'm wondering, you're going to come into office if you're elected with a pretty full agenda dealing with voting machines and dealing with other issues. Why should the Secretary of State's office spend resources dealing with issues like fair tax and human trafficking?
Thank you for your question. Really, I put that out there so people understand what my value system is. So I believe in the fair tax. I also believe that we need to do something about human trafficking. And whatever I can in the Secretary of State's office, which we do, because there are people that actually engage in illicit, illegal activities. When I was on City Council, I brought together our city attorney and also another council member, and we worked on the model ordinance to shut down illicit massage parlors that were operating under a corporate shell. And as the overseer of the corporations division, we do have some leverage that we can bring to bear on that. Obviously, the new voting machines is going to be their #1 issue, but I also want to make sure that voters understand the totality of what my worldview is and what my belief system is so they can make an informed judgment.
All right, Patricia Murphy, you'll get the final question here to David Belle-Isle.
Mr. Belle-Isle, you have said that you support President Trump, especially on the issue of election integrity. Although national security agencies have said that the Russian government has tried to hack into state election systems in 22 states, the president has raised some doubts about whether Russia is a malicious figure in U.S. elections. Do you believe Russia is a threat to U.S. elections and Georgia elections? And if so, what will you do to ensure that Russians do not have an effect on the Georgia election in the future?
Well, I think the question of whether it's Russia or some other actor is really immaterial. The real question is, are our votes, is our database, are our records secure? And so what I want to see, and I talked a little bit about in the previous question, and I talked about the fact that there should be 2 electronic records. And let me just explain that for a second. So the system that I envision is a system where you would vote electronically. When you hit cast ballot, that electronic record is stored and a paper ballot is printed out so that you can verify it. That would then be submitted to a second machine, which would be scanned, creating a second electronic record. And what I would do is I would take those 2 electronic records and I would store them on 2 separate closed-circuit cyber-secured databases. I do believe we need to be using the best technology available to do that. And I think that creates better voter confidence and better voter security. And whether that actor is Russia or somebody else, the point is not who it is. The point is to make sure that our elections are secure, because the integrity of our state depends on the integrity of our elections.
All right. Thank you, David Belle-Isle. Now, that concludes the first portion of the debate. The candidates are now going to ask a question of their opponent, and each candidate will have 30 seconds to ask the question, 60 seconds to respond, and then 30 seconds for a rebuttal. And by random selection, Brad Raffensperger, you may ask the first question.
Mr. Belle-Isle, as mayor, you were in charge of zoning, rezonings, land use, and regulations of real estate interests for 7 years. You regulated and rezoned real estate and real estate interest, and now they are funding the majority of your campaign. Most of your campaign is being funded by the very people you regulated. Many people would say that smacks of pay-to-play, cash register politics. Given what we're seeing in Atlanta and other local governments these days, is it appropriate to fund your campaign almost entirely by the people you've been regulating as mayor?
Well, not everybody has $1.2 million of their own money to put in this race. The money I've raised has been because I presented the case of where Alpharetta was and where it is. They've given money because of the leadership that I have. Now, I will say this, that it's easy to see something and something doesn't look quite right. Trillium Services, for instance, is a company that's owned by Brad's wife. Well, that company does a housing project for the University of Georgia. Now, is that because he's a state house representative? I don't know, but it does seem shady, so I can certainly see your concern.
And Brad, we want to give you an opportunity to respond.
Well, Trillium Structures did that work prior to me being a state representative, and I've never leveraged my position as an elected public service for my own personal gain. I think Belle-Isle must be a French word for cash register.
All right, Brad Raffensperger, thank you very much. David Belle-Isle, we want to invite you now to ask a question.
Absolutely. It's important that our next Republican nominee not be under an ethical cloud as they face John Barrow. Mr. Raffensperger, you have multiple judgments in Muskogee County alone, from volume transportation to Uncle Bubba's transportation to Savaco, Georgia, and others. Now, you have put $1.2 million of your own money in this race. The money that you owe in these companies is less than half of that. What I want to ask is, if you're the Republican nominee, to put yourself on the best footing to face John Barrow, will you commit to paying these companies so that you can be debt-free and have a clear conscience as you face the Democrat nominee?
Many years ago, we faced headwinds. Many of our suppliers did not pay us, and we had to rebuild. And I've done that. I actually, by the hard lessons I learned during that time, I was able to get through the 2008 recession, the Great Recession. But you got caught on this very stage 9 weeks ago for taking over $30,000 of illegal campaign contributions, and you held on to that money until you made it into the runoff. You used that money to defeat Senator Josh McCoon. Why didn't you pay the money back as soon as you realized that those were illegal campaign contributions?
Funny thing about this is that those contributions were paid back immediately, but disclosures don't come out until this last week. And this is what people hate about politics, is that this feigned ethical outrage, he's done the exact same thing, and he hasn't given back a penny of those dollars. You need to look at your own disclosures. I would also say, I would love you to look at that camera right over there. And when it comes to Bobby and Martha, who owned Uncle Bubba's Trucking, when it comes to Larry Sellers of Fayetteville, when it comes to Rick Floyd of Fayetteville, those companies tell them, like, hey, look, it was hard times. Yeah, you're worth $26 million now, and yes, you're willing to put $1.2 million in this campaign, but it's not worth paying back those Georgians, those Georgia employees for their money.
Now, for those of you just joining us, this is the runoff debate between the Republican candidates for Secretary of State. We're now going to go back to the panel to ask questions to the candidates of their choice as we run out of time. And as a point of moderator privilege here, I may also ask some questions. I'll determine when a rebuttal is appropriate as well. So, Patricia Murphy, you'll get the first question and in this round.
Okay, I would actually like to ask this question of both gentlemen. A few weeks ago, Lieutenant Governor Casey Cagle made major national headlines when he tweeted, "I will kill any tax legislation that benefits Delta unless the company changes its position and fully reinstates its relationship with the NRA. Corporations cannot attack conservatives and expect us not to fight back." Did you both support the Lieutenant Governor's decision to make that public announcement? And because the Secretary of State's office has so much interface with Georgia corporations, would you consider it appropriate that the fact that you're a conservative is a way that you could interface with those and potentially ensure that they don't attack conservatives in the process, in your opinion?
Hey, I'll lead off. First of all, let me just say I support the NRA, but I do not believe that it is the business or the role of government to punish a business for a political opinion. And so I think Delta is a proud company of Georgia. We're proud to have them. I can't speak to anyone else's opinion with respect to Delta, but I think when the power of government, if we're going to use that to try to craft personal opinions, then I think that's the wrong direction for Georgia. I believe that the state legislature and I believe that our government should exist to get barriers out of the way and grow business, not punish them for a political opinion.
As Secretary of State, my job is to support corporations with the Corporations Division to be responsive to their needs. And I don't believe that many corporations should be taking social policy statements. I don't think that's appropriate. All it does is inflame 50% of the people. But likewise, I don't believe that we should be seeking to use our positions of power to go after corporations that take a view against us. I'm a life member of the NRA, and I support the NRA. And I don't support the decision of Delta, but I would not use my political power to harm a Georgia corporation.
And Bradley, George, it's now your opportunity to ask a question.
Mr. Belle-Isle, you've called for requiring voter ID for absentee ballots.
Absolutely.
The state of Wisconsin several years ago enacted a pretty strict voter ID law that includes that requirement. And since then, the state has been locked in a legal battle with the ACLU and other groups that are trying to overturn that law. Mm-hmm. Do you worry at all that if that requirement were to become law in Georgia, that you would be opening up the state to years of litigation?
Well, here's the thing. The Secretary of State, no matter who it is going to get sued. They get sued on a regular basis. And so we got to do and focus on what's right. We can't have this policy of, well, I'm a little timid. My opponent in one of the debates that we had was particularly afraid of that litigation aspect of it, and that's why he hasn't supported a photo ID for the absentee ballot until recently. But the reason that we have that photo ID is to make sure that only the people who are actually registered to vote are doing that vote. We see incidents in the city of Atlanta where 500 absentee applications suddenly show up in a very close mayoral race. That's troubling. And not just for Atlanta, it's troubling for the entire state of Georgia. When you look at the integrity of our state, when you know that the integrity of our state depends on the integrity of our elections, we got to make sure that the people who are registered to vote are the ones who are voting. I believe in that application process, you should be able to present a copy of your photo ID or a scanned copy. We can work on ways to make that easy, but we've got to secure our elections here in the state of Georgia.
All right. Thank you, David Belle-Isle. Patricia Murphy, I want to turn it back over to you.
Mr. Raffensperger, could you speak to the question of the fact that Georgia is one of only 5 states that does not have a paper ballot backup of the current electronic voting system? How would you change that, and do you have confidence in the 2018 election results?
I have confidence in the election system we have right now, but obviously the first question today was that the system needs to be updated. Those current voting systems were put into place in 2002, 16 years ago, and your iPhone is now up to the iPhone X, that we're carrying around on us. So look at all the technology improvements. What I've said for the last 16 months as I've been traveling throughout the state is we need to bring together 5 key constituencies on that. Number 1 is the House and the Speaker. Number 2 is the Senate and the Lieutenant Governor. Number 3 is the Governor. Those folks have to make the hard decision, how much is it going to cost, and then they have to authorize the funds. But we want to make sure we bring in all the county election supervisors and then also some of these technology experts. One of the things that came out of the 2005 bipartisan commission that President Jimmy Carter and Secretary of State Baker chaired was that if you use a DR machine, you should have a auditable paper trail, and that's the next system that we need to bring with a paper trail.
Bradley George.
This question is for both of you. Regardless if whoever wins the runoff, if you win the general election, you're going to be taking office at the same time as a new governor. In the past, we've seen this relationship between the governor and the Secretary of State, where the Secretary of State's office has been a little bit of a political football, where the governor has cut the budget, has taken away responsibilities, added responsibilities, et cetera. What will both of you do if you were to win this runoff and then win the general election to make sure that you have a good relationship with the new governor and you make sure that your office remains independent?
Well, I'll take that one. I've been endorsed by 105 State House members and also 21 state senators. And I've been respectful of everyone's positional authority. I understand that I have to work with these folks, and that's why the last 4 years when I was in the General Assembly, I worked with folks from in the Republican caucus that are very, very conservative and some folks that are more moderate. And I always work together with them on legislation, and I'll do the same thing with the Senate, the Lieutenant Governor, and the Governor, because you have to work with folks, and I think I'll do that, and yet still stand for the hard and solid principles that I believe in: voter security, voter protections for all Georgians. Thanks.
Bradley, the Secretary of State's office is an important job, so I don't mean to diminish it by what I'm about to say. But the Secretary of State's office is a hat-in-hand position. And what I mean by that, and to your point, is that there's almost no authority in that office, and there's almost no resources in that office. And to me, that sounds to me a lot like mayor. The mayor is an important job in the city of Alpharetta, but it doesn't have near the authority that people think. But what we were able to do in the city of Alpharetta is reinvent our downtown. We were able to bring 85 acres of dirt into what is now Avalon. We were able to create a technology incubator, a conference center, bring a technical college. We were able to grow the city of Alpharetta to over 640 technology companies and over 100,000 jobs. Not because of the authority of the mayor, but because of the ability to lead beyond the authority and the resources of that office. That's what we need in our Georgia Secretary of State to get things done.
Patricia Murphy, back to you.
My question is for both gentlemen as well. Republicans in this runoff will be deciding essentially who's the best one of the two of you to take on John Barrow, who is, I think people agree, a strong candidate for the Democrats. Why would you be a stronger candidate than the other? And how will you appeal to independent voters who are just tuning into this in November?
I'm going to lead right off on that. Because here's the thing. So my opponent, who's here today, in 6 years, this is his third political office that he's chased. When he is a city councilman, he has very little to point to. When he is a state rep, he has very little to point to. And here's the thing. You cannot win this race. You cannot defeat John Barrow on rhetoric alone. You're going to need not simply a voting record, you're going to need a leadership record. And so what I've been able to do, if I could put everybody into a bus, I could tell you the dramas, the ups and downs of the things that we accomplished in the most successful 7 years in Alpharetta's 160-year history. And I could show you how we got people on board, how we got private people on board, private companies on board to invest and see a future that did not then exist in the city of Alpharetta. So when it comes to, yes, we want to defeat voter fraud, we want to champion Georgia jobs, but we've got to have something more than rhetoric. We've got to have real results and real leadership.
And Brad Raffensperger, we definitely want to give you an opportunity to rebut that.
Thank you for your question. Well, I've gone around the state. I've told people a couple things. One is I'm a licensed engineer. I'm licensed in 30 states, and I'm a licensed general contractor. In some historical context, John Barrow, was a congressman for 10 years. They sent in legislators, and he beat the legislators. Then they sent in attorneys, and he beat the attorney. But then they sent in a contractor, and that contractor, beat him. and that's who our new congressman is. I'm a contractor, and I know how to study hard and make my case. I was in a debate stage just a few weeks ago with the AIA, the Architects Association. I didn't get schooled by John Barrow in that debate. My opponent did. And so I understand that John Barrow is a very, clever attorney. But at the end of the day, Republicans have the best message. We're talking about jobs, we're talking about opportunity, and that's what I bring to bear. I understand that he's not Paul Bunyan. He puts his pants on one leg at a time, just like I do. I'll come prepared, and I'll fight. Thank you.
Bradley George.
This question is for both of you. We'll start with Mr. Raffensperger. Both of you talk about voter security, voter integrity, but I'm curious if one of you is elected Secretary of State, what are you going to do to encourage voter registration and voter participation?
I think that's a great question, and we do need to do more of that. In fact, the 2005 Commission talked about that. One of the things that we've done in a couple areas is to actually encourage young folks to get involved in the process as poll workers. We did that in Effingham, and we also did that up in Forsyth County, and they were successful models. Also, the Secretary of State needs to have, really the bully pulpit of really highlighting the importance of voting, that this is your priceless franchise to vote in an election, and then also local county parties of Democrat and Republican and Libertarian so that they can get people registered to vote. We need outreach in it's really 360 all over the state to really publicize the importance of voting.
I believe there's really an untapped opportunity. We have Rotary clubs, Kiwanis clubs, and so many civic groups all across the state of Georgia. And while I do believe it's the Secretary of State's office to lead that charge, we can leverage as a civic responsibility better than what we have in terms of creating the need and the value of voting. And that being said, too, though, there is a fine line and there's a balance. Oftentimes we say on the Republican side, defeat voter fraud, defeat voter fraud. That's how we phrase it. On the other side of the equation, and John Barrow has used this, look, we want to defeat voter suppression, defeat voter suppression. So the question is, how do those two coalesce? How do they work one against the other? I firmly believe that the best way to defeat voter suppression is to defeat voter fraud. So those secure elections, I do think that turns out more people, because when people believe it's fair, when people believe it's accurate, when we have the proper equipment, more people participate in the process.
And Patricia Murphy, back to you.
This question is for both of you. A criticism of the requirement for a photo ID for voters is that it would suppress voters, that it could disenfranchise older voters, minority voters, and less well-off voters, poor voters. What specifically would you suggest to do to ensure that that doesn't happen, that people who can't afford an ID or can't get out of their home could vote with a photo ID?
I think we could be creative in that and how we handle it, and making sure that we can find ways for those who can't get out of their home and that sort of thing. But to the point that I just made a second ago, is that defeating voter fraud, sometimes defeating voter suppression means defeating voter fraud, is that by the same token, yes, you may have some people that feel like it's difficult for them to get a photo ID, which is free under Georgia law. But at the same time, you've got people, if they think the absentee ballot process is being abused, that they won't show up because they feel like the fix is in.
Well, that statement's been made over the years, and it's always been shown to be false. They could never find one single person in Georgia that could not vote because of lack of having a photo ID. And the state of Georgia passed a law that the photo ID will be free. So it's really just a red herring that's been thrown out. We want everyone to be able to vote, and the photo ID is the best way of making sure that whoever shows up that day, their name matches the photo that's on there, and it's worked in Georgia.
All right, that is all the time that we have for questions. But now each candidate will have 60 seconds for a closing statement. And Brad Raffensperger, you're going to get the first closing statement.
As a business owner, I have the vision and the experience to run a complex organization with about 175 people. As a licensed engineer and as a licensed general contractor, I understand the critical importance of streamlining corporations and business licensing. I've never voted for a tax increase, and I've never leveraged my position as an elected public servant for my personal gain. I have a 100% rating from the Faith and Freedom Coalition. I'm pro-life. I'm a solid conservative. As your next Secretary of State, I'll make sure that only Americans vote in our election, and that Georgia's a great place to find a job and a great place to build a business. And I'm asking for your vote on the July 24th runoff election. Thank you.
Thank you. And David Belle-Isle, you'll get the final closing statement.
As I've gone across the state of Georgia, I've seen obviously a lot of success in Metro Atlanta. But as you go beyond Metro Atlanta, we have communities that were once prosperous that are no longer prosperous. We've got communities that are down to their last industry, some down to their last employer. Oftentimes, these are people who pay their taxes, who actually pay their bills, even if they're a long time ago. But they need help. They need someone who can lead beyond the authority of the offices, beyond the resources of that office, to bring a better Georgia for every Georgian everywhere. And so that's what we've been doing. I want to put on my mayor's hat and not simply just defeat voter fraud, but that's important. I want to be able to grow what Georgia does best: agriculture, technology, and logistics. We have the opportunity to be the #1 ag tech state in the country. But I need your help. I need your help to defeat voter fraud. I need your help to champion Georgia jobs, and I need your help to defeat the Democrats and John Barrow in November. David Belle-Isle, Republican, Secretary of State.
Thank you very much. And that concludes our debate. We'd like to remind voters that the runoff elections will be held on Tuesday, July 24th. The early voting has already begun. I want to extend our thanks to the candidates as well as our panel of journalists. We'd also like to thank the Atlanta Press Club for arranging today's debate. Now, for more information about the Atlanta Press Club and all of the runoff debates they'll host, visit atlantapressclub.org. This debate will be archived there as well as on Georgia Public Broadcasting's website, gpb.org. I'm Sine Simpson. Thanks for joining us for the Atlanta Press Club Loudermilk Young Debate Series.